The President of Kenya, William Ruto, on Wednesday said that a bill containing contentious tax hikes will be withdrawn, dramatically reversing course after more than 20 persons died and Parliament was ransacked by protesters opposed to the bill. But he warned that the withdrawal of the finance bill would mean a significant shortfall in funding for development programs, particularly designed to help farmers and school teachers, amongst others. As the East African nation struggles to lower its foreign debt burden, the president's cash-strapped government said the increases were needed to service the country's massive debt of some 10 trillion shillings. That's about $78 billion, equally to roughly 70% of the legislation. Well, joining me on the program, of course, it's all going to be about Kenya today, is Chris Otieno, is the CEO and lead consultant at SAIT East Africa Limited, and also specializing in national and international crimes from Nairobi, Kenya. I also have Richard Gatheru, is a financial analyst and also researcher from Nairobi, Kenya also. Well, at some point too, I'll be having Alex Mwathi, is a socio-economic commentator and political analyst from Kenya. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much for.
All right. Now, let's, of course, before we even get into the crux of the conversation, let's listen a bit to what the president actually did say concerning the protest and the recent decision the government reached as regards taxes. This happened hours ago. Take a listen.
I send my condolences to the families of those who lost their loved ones in this very unfortunate manner. Consequently, having reflected on the continuing conversation around the content of the Finance Bill 2024 and listening keenly to the people of Kenya who have said loudly that they want nothing to do with this Finance Bill 2024, I concede, and therefore I will not sign the 2024 Finance Bill, and it shall subsequently be withdrawn, and I have agreed with these members that that becomes our collective position. With the deficits that now exist, together, and as I committed last Sunday, I will be proposing an engagement with the young people of our nation, our sons and daughters, for us to listen to them. As I said on Sunday, listen to their views, listen to their proposals, their ideas, their concerns, and what they think we should do better as we go forward. I am also recommending a multi-sectoral, bipartisan, multi-stakeholder engagement from civil society, religious organizations, professional bodies, for us as a nation to speak to the future of our country, for immediate further austerity measures to reduce expenditure, starting with the office of the president, the entire presidency, and extending to the entire executive arm of government. Operational expenditure in the presidency be reduced to remove allocations for the confidential fort, reduce travel, hospitality, purchase of motor vehicles, renovations, and other expenditures.
I mean, you just saw the president of Kenya there address the Bergen issues that actually did prompt the protest that engulfed the country. And unfortunately, some individuals lost their lives. Now, the bottom line of the protest was Kenyans were not comfortable with the bill that, according to the president, contentious bill that, of course, involved tax reviews upwards for Kenyans who felt they were already paying too much when it comes to the cost of living. Now, the president in that particular speech did say that particular bill has been withdrawn, and also talked about the fact that his government will be sort of doing a pay cut for public officers in the state, amongst other issues. But let me bring on Chris right now, on this particular conversation. Chris, what do you make of the president's speech just a while ago?
Thank you very much for having me. And I want to say right from onset that yes, this is what the nation needed to hear from the president. The initial statement that he had put out was not quite encouraging. And I can also say, and that looking at the tenets of every item that our president has mentioned, you find that they are falling into two categories that form the basis on which fellow Kenyans had gone to the streets. First was economic reforms. There was this thought felt by every Kenyan in this country of ours that the cost of living, household spend per family, have gone up by a percentage that was, you could not believe it. Things are very expensive in this country. The cost of living is very high in this country. Then when you come to the next item that you spoke about was social reforms and governance. We have issues in this country that are aligned towards social governance that requires immediate address. And if you listen to the president's speech very well and very keenly, just like you have put it and showed it up here, he addressed every item that was in the summary of the key items that were making our fellow Kenyans go to the street and say no to this finance bill of 2024. And I'm glad to go through each and every of these items, if you'd allow me to go through them, just to kick up and make room for really this in-depth discussion of what is happening in this country in terms of this finance bill. Thank you.
All right. I'm sure you would still get some time to go through some of those items and, your take on them. But let me bring on Richard. Richard, the president actually did address the nation yesterday when the parliament was ransacked. And, given the tone of the president, yesterday night when he addressed the nation and now, I'd like to know exactly your take. Richard, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to join this conversation. So if you compare the president's speech yesterday and the one that he made today, yesterday's speech portrayed a leader who has lost touch with the people. If you look at what some of the key areas, as my brother has raised, about the issue of the taxation, Kenyans have been having a challenge with the appropriation of the tax, because you have the finance bill and then you have the appropriation bill. One of the great concerns that Kenyans were raising was the issue that the government is losing touch with the what we call here in Kenya the common mwananchi, or the citizen. And the speech was, actually, most Kenyans found it a bit rude. It was not welcoming. And the reason why a majority of the young people were agitated is the president in his speech, in the first address, did not even talk about the lives that were lost during the protest. And so that didn't resonate well with the majority of the Kenyans. And I only wish and pray that the president would reconsider some of the harsh measures that the government is taking, because the Kenyans don't have an issue with paying taxes. One of the greatest challenges that they have is the way the taxes are being managed, like the way the finances are being managed. Because if you look at some of the issues that they have proposed in some of the taxes, some of the highlights, issues to do with like the introduction of motor vehicle tax, which was placed at 2.5%, it didn't augur well with most of the Kenyans. And then actually issues to do with the introduction of advanced pricing agreements. So these are some of the key areas that Kenyans were having an issue with. And the president actually in his address, if you listened to it yesterday, did not address anything to do with the finance bill. And that actually, I bet worked against him, and probably that could have maybe caused the reason why today he had to make another speech, and of course, dwell much into the issues that were affecting Kenyans. Yeah, thank you.
All right. I mean, Richard, you talked you touched extensively on some issues. I mean, yesterday I did watch the president's address to the nation. I mean, people know that President William Ruto is much of an orator, but yesterday's address, you could sense a bit of maybe apprehension in his voice. I mean, it was a bit shaky, and some even said with a some elements of anger in it. And all he talked about in yesterday's speech was the fact that individuals that were responsible for the invasion of the Senate and all of that would be punished. But today's speech seems to address the core issues. But let's even backtrack a bit and look at what exactly the bill is all about. Now, we know that the administration of Ruto, has sort of witnessed massive, debt burden at about 10 trillion shillings. That's about $78 billion. And equally to a rough, at least 70%, of Kenya's GDP goes into servicing of this debt. And one of the reasons why, of course, the president did propose it. Let's just look at the graphic breakdown of what the proposed bill looked like. I want that graphics to come on the screen right now. 60% sale on that's 60% sales tax on bread. There's a 25% duty on cooking oil, 2.5% annual taxes on vehicles, and it goes on to also talk about the 60% on goods and services for the direct and exclusive use of construction equipment or equipping of specialized hospitals with a minimum bed capacity of 50. Now, I'm coming back to you on this, Chris. Looking at the current financial situation of Kenyans, and also the fact that Kenya right now has a massive debt burden. I mean, are there items on that bill that you felt, okay, yes, we know that, it's talking about an increase, but maybe some items, are still okay and good to go?
I have not in any way seen any item in that proposed financial bill that I would say is an item that we need to let go. I mean, continue. I have not seen anything like that. What I have seen, just like my other fellow Kenyans have seen, is a punitive bill that's going to strain us more and more and more. And utmost, one of the most critical items in this bill, as proposed, was a levy of 39% on fuel. We know, world over, the soonest you touch or create an increase in fuel, that is a cross-board increment in every item that is there in the supply chain or any item that is there in the shop, in the shop floors. That will go up. Now, you have that 9%, you're proposing that 9% increase in tax in the fuel levy, and then you're having a 2.5% increase in motor vehicle, another 16% on bread. What does that mean? It's going to be double or triple. Yeah, we observe the 16% increment, and on top of it, load another increment coming from fuel levy. That also push up the cost of production in terms of power and other utilities. What does that mean to us? It means a lot of companies are going to run away from our beloved Republic of Kenya and go to our neighbors here, Ethiopia, Tanzania, who are offering much better business terms of engagement, lower cost of production to produce their goods, because every business is inclined to making profit at its maximum. And that includes lowering the cost of production. So from where I'm seated, I do not see any item in that bill that would have favored anyone, to include social welfare.
But how would you have rather suggested that the country generates revenue to sort of finance its loan or deficit, and also infrastructural projects that the administration hopes to run?
There are many ways. One of the ways that is also still in one of the objections that we're putting forward to this finance bill, there are positions that have been created within the system of our government, which we think is a duplication of responsibility. What else? We need a segregation to reduce the cost that we are taking as a burden in our budget. There's this position known as CAS, Chief Administrative Secretary. When you go in depth and look at what these guys are doing in their position, number one, is not even in the Constitution. We are struggling with that bill. Number two, they're going to incur another salary payments allowances that will press us more and more in terms of the amount of money that we need to sustain our government. So why introduce positions that have little value addition in the entire system of management of the government and put that burden to the common man to be able to pay for it? No, we should not do that. The leanness, what the president mentioned, like I said, he has looked at the operation of his government and seen there's a certain area that he can incur cost savings. And one of those cost savings, look at it, they were giving 600 million Kenyan shillings to renovations only. 600 million Kenyan shillings to renovations. That is a huge amount that can support a lot of projects within the country, and that can reduce the cost of living for our fellow Kenyans. Allowances that are paid to our members of parliament, these are huge allowances, sitting allowances. You end up finding that somebody at the end of the month has an allowance take home that is equivalent about 10 times his monthly salary. So what are we saying there? We are saying there are other avenues that we can use as a nation to reduce our financial burden and then use that money somewhere else to pay debts, offset debts, or even improve the quality of life for our common Kenyans here. So there are many other items that we can look at to make this better. And the president will consider to that.
All right. I would like to Richard to dive into this. I mean, what other avenues are there? Because right now we know what the loan or the debt profile of the country says, and also the revenue generation. That's the GDP of the country, you know, vis-a-vis the developmental projects and its commitments across board. So how else would you have suggested that the administration went about raising funds?
So thank you so much. And I agree with my brother. Kenyans, and once again, I say, don't have an issue with paying taxes. But how this money is being appropriated and some of the position, like he has rightly mentioned, like the CAS position, those are not positions. Actually, it was termed unconstitutional. So if you look at corruption has become like the cancer that eats this government. If you look at the excessive spending on travels and people who accompany the president on just normal travels will just send a message that something is wrong. So just deal with corruption in Kenya, make good use of the money and the taxes that Kenyans are paying, and they'll not have an issue with paying taxes. Because one of the greatest challenge, if you look at our health sector, it's corrupting. If you look at the education sector, the government had set aside, and as part of their manifesto, there was a very good program about the school feeding program that would ensure that all children who are going to school are well fed. But we see the government is almost striking out some of those amendments and raising taxes. So Kenyans feel agitated. And actually, these are some of the reasons that are causing Kenyans to feel like the government is losing touch with them. Another thing is that when this government took over, the story has been that they took over and met coffers that were empty. But if you look at how they are spending, issues to do with the renovation, there's a budget set for the president and the spouse of the president. Like Kenyans just feel we are losing it out. So if they just increased, because the only thing we need to do is increase the tax base, but not raise the taxes. Because the moment Kenyans stop paying taxes... I'm sorry,
you said the only thing we need to do is increase the tax base, but not raise taxes.
Oh, sorry. What I mean is that we just need to ensure that Kenyans and people who are running business are just paying their taxes as they ought to do. But raising taxes becomes an issue to actually majority of the Kenyans. Because look at the introduction of the eco levy. Introduction of the VAT, especially bread, to attract a VAT at 16% from zero-rated status. You see, this is something that every Kenyan in the morning probably will be taking. And actually, if you've listened to the conversation that has been going on here in Kenya, actually one of the some of the implementers of this bill was asked, and the reason why, one of the reasons they were giving to the VAT at 16% on bread was because of some medical issues that they had. But you see, this doesn't actually add up to some of the challenges that Kenyans are facing, because you just some of the basic needs that Kenyans need.
All right.
I just feel that we just need to deal with corruption and misappropriation of public funds, and we'll be able to deal with our debts.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, Richard. I mean, another issue. Chris, do you want to react?
Yeah, allow me to add something.
Okay.
Now, the the biggest number in our population is the youthful population. If you look at the employment the youthful population are taking right now, is in the digital market. Now, our government in this bill was proposing to levy a duty on digital platforms. That is almost like discouraging the young population from going into the business that will actually enable the government to tax more. What my brother is saying, increase the tax base, not the tax, increase the tax base. So if you allow the youngsters to go into the market where they are good at digital platforms, then we can create more avenues for revenues to stream into the government coffers and enable us get money to spend here and there to support what we need to bring out in our country as a cohesive and working nation. So there are other avenues. Just an example here.
All right. Now, still an offshoot of this particular protest that happened has to do with human rights violation. Now, the state-funded Kenya National Commission on Human Rights actually said that it recorded about 22 deaths and about 300 injured victims. And of course, has added that there would be some sort of investigation into all of this. Just a while ago, we showed some footage of, some of the protesters that were manhandled by policemen or anti-riot policemen. And I mean, what actually did allow this escalate was how it was reported and even seen where some, men in uniform opened live rounds at some of these protesters, and things, of course, went haywire from there. This brings to the fore, number one, the human rights violations, that happened during the course of that protest, and also the caliber of police force, in Kenya. I would like your reaction to that, Chris.
I want to say one thing. I totally want to agree with you. And we have seen our deputy president go live with the national television and say that, and actually point out where our failure was. The failure was in our inability by the intelligence services to be able to put it in clear words, the magnitude of what we were dealing with. And that had a ripple effect in the operational plan by our policemen, in that they went to the operational field without that required preparedness, and that created desperation in them because the youth were very high in numbers. They came high in numbers and they were not relenting. They were budging. So these policemen went to the extent of going back to self-defense, and they were using live ammunition, which is wrong. And every police person who is found responsible for having taken away a Kenyan life must face the true force, the true arm of the law, because that is completely wrong. But it goes, it's far-fetched, right from the top, where our intelligence failed, and that intelligence through poor planning. Those who came up with that operational plan, all persons must take responsibility, because that resulted to what we are seeing, the loss of life of so many innocent Kenyans who had gone out there for peaceful demonstration. But due to circumstances that were from poor planning in the operation, ended up losing their lives. So I totally support that every person responsible for this failure, the systematic failure in execution of law and order, must face the true wrath of the law, because that has even exposed our country in the international grounds that we are poor in terms of maintaining law and order.
I mean, for our viewers watching, I'd just like to appeal that viewers' discretion is strongly advised. As we, of course, go in the course of this particular conversation. What you just saw a while ago, some of the footage that did happen during the protest in Kenya. I would come to you right now, Richard. Right now, Kenya is one of those nations proposing to send, about 1,000 police officers to Haiti to help fight gangs. And this is happening. What does this reflect? And do you think this, in a way, could maybe tint the chances of Kenya being a part of this delegation?
Well, thank you so much. Maybe before probably I respond, just a mention about the protest that happened yesterday. I'm sure probably you've come across this statement about the Gen Zs and the millennials. And just to point out, because I am a young person, a youth in Kenya, and I'll tell you that this, in a way, is a generation that has refused to fall victim to politics, to religion, and actually to tribal alignment. So these are young people who are demanding to be heard and their voice to be heard. And these are also people who've gone through some of these bills to understand how they affect them in one way or another. Coming back to the question about the deployment of police to Haiti, well, I would say it's a bit sad looking at the security issues in Kenya, because we still have an issue with the bandits who actually are killing people, and a pastoralist and the fight are still going on in some of the parts in Kenya, like Baringo. And so actually it's an irony when we see the effort that the president is putting towards settling maybe peace in Haiti. Well, while it might be a good cause, actually Kenyans feel in a way with some of these human rights violations, actually it's an irony that the president is on the forefront, fronting police to go and calm situation in Haiti while Kenya is burning. And this was so evident yesterday. And this also sends a message to leaders that they need to listen to the people who elected them in some of these positions. Because the moment you lose touch with your members, when you lose touch with some of the people who elected you into that position, then some of these things are bound to happen. And if you followed keenly the protest yesterday, these were young Kenyan citizens who were unarmed. If you watched, some of these coverage were live. They were unarmed. The only thing they were carrying were placards and probably a bottle of water to safeguard them from some of the tear gases. So this is quite unfortunate. And from my end, I feel this was a misplaced priority for the president to be sending troops, policemen to Haiti, while Kenya, still some of the human rights are still being violated. Thank you so much.
All right. I'd like to also know Chris's take on this. Of course, deployment of some police officers to Haiti by the Kenyan government. Looking at all these current realities, do you think that should be on the front burner?
I believe as a country, we still need to operate for multi-dimensional level. We can be able to handle both our internal issues and at the same time take our part in international issues. Now, if we look at the problem here, the problem is not the deployment. Deployment is the number of policemen that we have or number of security forces that we have in this country. United Nations gives a ratio of 1:450. Whereas in our country, we are 1:1,200. That is a very high figure that does not really fall pretty well. At the same time, the banditry problem in northeastern Kenya, that has been there for a very long time. So we need to find other means, apart from coercion, military intervention in terms of sorting out that conflict. We need to find other means that can be able to be very, very effective and ensure that there is no influx of small weapons that are coming from neighboring countries who have instabilities here and there. But it is also an irony right now that we have these national problems. Most Kenyans are losing their lives from an insecurity perspective, but at the same time we are sending our Kenyan forces, our Kenyan boots out there, 20,000 kilometers out, far out of our borders. Now, it is going to be worse if at all these Kenyan security forces end up in a situation where we have a loss of life or complete failure of this operation. That is going to anger Kenyans, and that is going to raise our temperatures even higher. So we are praying, and we are asking God Almighty to ensure that He blesses that we don't have those kind of situations out there, because that will endanger our country. But in terms of deployment, I believe that we must focus ourselves in sorting our domestic problems first before we can go outside to offer or play our position in the international arena.
All right. Thank you so much for your contribution on the program, Chris Otieno, CEO and lead consultant, State East Africa Limited, and also Richard Gatheru, a financial analyst and researcher from Nairobi, Kenya. Gentlemen, once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
All right.